Well, that was a lot of cut content. My gosh, they just burnt through like 80 pages out of nowhere with this episode 2 of Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation's second season. But at least we had the appearance of Best Bro Soldat. At least that was one nugget of goodness in this episode. But damn, yeah, this is my impressions on the second episode. As per usual, this is the perspective of somebody that has read up to volume 12 of the novel series. No spoilers here. I will just go over what was actually skipped, and they can't really go back and do it, and give a little more context as to each scene because, yes, as I joked about, they skipped a lot of stuff in this episode. To give people an idea, chapters 3 and 4 of volume 7, which is what this covered, was like 80 pages. That's twice as much as what the prologue chapter 1 and 2 was, which was the last episode. So, yeah, twice as much content, half the time to work with. They're going to cut stuff. First things first, though, as per usual, I checked out the original broadcast. It doesn't look like anything was skipped, even though I thought that they might have skipped something around Sarah in that one scene there because it was a couple of awkward shot changes, but nothing was cut. Same as the global version as the broadcast in Japan. Additionally, I thought it was really interesting that quite a few scenes got changed from the actual trailer. Like the scene with Soldat on top of the Frost Drake. They removed the Frost Drake from the PV. Additionally, yes, the earlier PVs that we got with them kind of being surrounded and them having that kind of, that shifting, rotating shot was changed, which I thought was technically good because nothing in the novel says anything about them being on a floating piece of rock and shooting drakes as they came down on them. Technically, the finished product of episode 2 is completely different anyways, so no matter what, it's different than the novels. But yes, let's just jump right into it, kicking off the episode with, yes, Rudeus doing his exercises, trying to get the name of Quagmire. Well, he's trying to get his name out there, but he gets the name of Quagmire because that's all he really uses in a lot of parties. What he's essentially doing is that he's assisting other groups and other parties with their jobs, and he's only asking for like 10% of the reward and 50% of what he actually carries back. So it's actually a really good deal for all these parties. That's why people really like him. He's getting his name out there. He's sort of taking inspiration from what Timothy did. This idea of giving more of your reward to other people, that way it kind of gains you favor in them. So yeah, a lot of people are trying to get the name out and trying to find Zenith. He even has traveling merchants and stuff going around and trying to spread the name that he's trying to find Zenith. And he's hoping that eventually Zenith will get word of this wherever she's at. She might be in a palace or something like that, or some other town, and she'll hear about Rudeus and come see him. But yes, I like that they actually include the fact that he's named pretty much his muscles. He's named his arms, he's named his legs and everything. But yeah, he's taking a lot of jobs, and one of the jobs is to help them move all this snow to this one magical device, this implement, that will then melt the snow itself. This was technically right before he finds out about Mimir and Sarah, but they moved it to the beginning of the episode. There's one important thing they sort of glossed over in this scene. Yes, he's helping them. He's basically at the implement and he's shoveling him towards the middle of the implement, and then he's putting his mana on it and it's melting everything. Nobody really expected him to melt as much as he did, but because he has a massive mana pool, he actually melted a whole bunch of stuff, and that really surprised everybody. But there was one little scene in here that was very quickly glossed over. A girl trips and falls and hurts herself, and he goes over and heals her. Now this is actually important. It might not be important to the anime because they're probably going to skip this. I have a prediction they're going to skip this next scene with that girl. So those that know what I'm talking about, they know what I'm talking about. I think they're going to skip that. And I think that's why they probably didn't put too much emphasis on this particular scene. Yes, he heals the girl, and she panics because she assumes that he's going to charge her a bunch of money. And this is just a street rat. She ends up running off and joining this other group of kids and starts whispering his name to them. She thanks him, and then she runs off into this alleyway. Again, this is assumed that these are just kids that are orphans. But yeah, it kind of gives the emphasis on the idea of, you know, some random healer coming and healing somebody is just kind of unheard of. But here with the anime, it just kind of gives emphasis to Sarah spotting him doing this, which was never indicated in the novels. But yes, Rudeus gets invited to join Counter Arrow on the next mission. The debate that Rudeus is having here is that he's trying to join as many parties as possible. He's trying to get his name out, so joining the same party over and over again doesn't really make sense. But he does like the idea of joining Counter Arrow because he just likes working with them. He feels like he's working with them rather than helping them. He feels comfortable with them. So he's debating in his mind of, do I really want to keep joining their party, but I kind of like joining their party. So yes, he ends up joining them. And the job they get is to collect Frost Drake scales. And Frost Drakes are very strong, mainly in the idea they run in packs. So they hit heavy on the idea that they're going in there to collect scales. Scales that were shed from them, not to fight them, because if they fight them, there's a good chance they're going to lose. So they do a lot of preparations in hopes that they're not going to run into them. But if they do, they have a plan. And thus begins the jumping of content. This really sucks for me, honestly, because there's so much world building in this whole scene. They first go down in here. Again, of course, Sarah falls, he catches her, and they eventually come across the fort. Now, this is a massive structure. They discuss it briefly in the anime, but this is the Galgal Ruins. It was created during the First Human-Demon War, and it was constructed by Largun Hargun, the Subterranean. This is one of the 5 greatest demon kings. By all accounts, he was a god-tier earth magician. And what he was doing during the war was that he was using his magic to burrow through the ground. So if humans created forts or whatever, he would just burrow underneath and just come right underneath them. That's what made his army so powerful. And yes, he constructed this massive fort. This is a towering fort. Not a cave, it's a towering fort. And they end up going inside of it. Now, the interesting thing in the fort itself is that it's comprised of a bunch of hallways. This is like just a random scribbled labyrinth. He kind of mentioned the idea that this is almost like it was created by a kid, just kind of creating these random routes that don't make any sense. There was doorways above them, almost indicating that demons themselves would be able to have the advantage if humans came in and attacked because they would be able to drop in from above. And additionally, they end up running into a wraith. Now, why this is significant is because it's a little more development around Timothy and the idea of what a party does to prevent disasters. They were quick to have a plan when this wraith showed up, because wraiths will end up reanimating skeletons. So they're pretty much fighting dead adventurers. And they have their formation perfect, and Mamoru uses divine magic to take out the wraith, because without the wraith being dead, the skeletons keep coming back up. And Timothy admits that they had this plan put into effect if they ever ran into a wraith because he's ran into one before. And it was disastrous for his party. He lost many of his members. Now, jumping back to the anime, yes, the scene with the frost drakes, which was not what I pictured in my head, because again, I'm picturing them being inside of a fort, inside of a building. The novel describes it as like a 100-meter hallway. And at the end of it is a statue of Kishirika. Or at least that's what Rudeus is assuming is adult Kishirika, because it kind of looks like the same outfit, but just bustier. And this is an area where the frost drakes come and they shed their scales. It's just kind of a middle point for their movement. Beyond the statue is their actual nest. That's where they don't want to go. But unfortunately, suddenly out of nowhere, drakes start showing up. They don't really explain it in the anime, but they were fleeing from Soldat's party. Soldat's party went to the nest and started wrecking them, and they were fleeing. The way it's described is that when the drakes come in, they're terrified. They're trying to get away, but then they hiss at Rudeus and his party because they're still a threat. So it kind of plays out the same. Rudeus erecting the wall, everybody else fleeing. Eventually, Sarah realizes this and turns back, and everybody else follows her. And then we get the appearance of Best Bro Soldat. And again, another one of those things where this isn't what I really pictured. They have all these frost drakes are surrounding them, and they're hissing at them. But they're not attacking quite yet. They're almost like they're pausing for a minute. But they're surrounded. All they can see is dozens of these frost drakes. And then suddenly, it's almost like what I imagine was like this mowing through behind them. Like suddenly just behind the drakes, there's just mayhem happening. That's Soldat. He's coming through and he's wrecking through them. And his party members are over here next to the statue. He's just plowing through them. But sadly, that's just how they adapted it. It's fine. But yeah, pretty much everything after this kind of plays out the same. The emphasis here is that these two caves essentially have connected. And they're kind of assuming that's the reason why these frost drakes are kind of coming out of the cave, is there's like this connection that's happening. The ecosystem of this cave and this ruin has significantly changed just based on these two connecting to each other. And yeah, Soldat had a job for over here, and they had a job for over here. So it wasn't that they double booked the quest itself, which does technically happen. It's just they happen to meet. But the aftermath is sort of the same. Whenever you do have two parties that kill one mob, you don't really share in the loot. But Soldat kind of gives them one of them at least. Rudeus kind of explains it well, and the idea that it's sort of like in a game. When you hit the mob and somebody else finishes it off, you don't really expect to get part of the loot. He acknowledges that Soldat's party was the reason why these things got killed. And yes, technically, Counter Arrow sort of explains that as well. Like, yeah, we were probably finished if they didn't show up. But he's still a jerk. Which I think is a really important thing in the next scene, where you have them all drinking afterwards. They essentially turn in their loot, and then they wanted to find a secluded bar that they knew that Soldat wouldn't go there. So they tried to find the most secluded bar and just started complaining about it. And the entire time, Rudeus, in his mind, isn't wanting to get involved. He assumes that Soldat isn't a bad person. There is a cool thing here that's sort of missed in the anime adaptation, is Reese always has this perspective of not really judging people. He doesn't really assume the worst about Soldat. This guy is obviously leading this party, so it's obvious that he is a good person. These people do follow him. He just assumes that he has his own problems, so he doesn't get involved with everybody talking behind his back. But yes, he ends up showing up anyways. The saddest little boy. Nobody has it as worse as him. He hates him. He hates that face, which I think is very telling. When I read this part in the book, I was like, this is very, very telling. I know this isn't the rest of Soldat. I know there's a reason why he is the way he is. For those that don't know, if you haven't gotten it by now, through even just being anime only, this writer knows how to write characters, and no character is just completely what you see at face value. Every one of them has something about them. But yeah, the adaptation of this whole scene was fine. I think Rudeus stayed seated the whole time, just looking at his lap, and Soldat's doing all this crap and then just ends up getting pulled out of the room. And he's just sitting there hoping things like, just keep looking down. Eventually this will pass. Just let it pass. Just let it pass. Don't acknowledge anything. He just sat there looking at his lap. And then Sarah came over and kind of cleaned him off. But then we get Sarah and Mimur's death. Rip Mimur. Rudeus is in the Adventure Guild and they come in and they ask about Sarah and Mimur. And Rudeus cracks a joke. He says, oh, did they elope? And they said, oh, so you can make jokes like that too. He realized at that point, wait, what's going on here? He was cracking a joke and then it kind of just got very serious very quickly. Yes, both Mimur and Sarah were dead, which, by the way, when I read that, it absolutely gut punched me. I'm like, oof. Ouch. But yeah, the problem here was they didn't confirm Sarah's death. And so Rudeus immediately is like, excuse me. And he walks out the door, goes to the inn, grabs his stuff, and immediately goes out. Now, he does have an advantage here because he has the ability to clear out the clouds, which, by the way, very lackluster animation, which is the episode in general, unfortunately. I'm kind of accepting at this point the show is not going to be that good looking. It's still better than 99% of all shows, but it's still not that good looking. Now, the forest itself is kind of a big oof for me, which again explains in the fact that they covered this much stuff in just one episode. They're going to have to cut a lot of content here. Everything leading up to the Triant is fine. It sort of did a pretty good job of kind of explaining the fact that what's going through Rudeus' mind right now is, what am I even doing? Like, I just grabbed my stuff and I went out there. What am I looking for here? Yes, Sarah was kind of a snotty kid, but at the same time, he had a feeling that he wanted to save her. Like, even though that Sarah does say nasty things to him, he acknowledged that none of it's said in a way that is mean to insult him. Like, it's just kind of logical thinking, or it's just things that need to be said. And I'm glad that they included what Soldat was saying. You half-ass everything. You never finish everything. And this is a moment where Rudeus is going, I want to finish something. He's been stuck. Rudeus, at this point in the story, he's stuck. I'm not accomplishing anything. I've been doing all this stuff. Nothing's really coming of it. I want to accomplish something. So that's why he's out there. I'm going to finish this. I'm going to make sure that Sarah is either live or dead and have that closure. He wants to finish a job. It's sort of giving credit to what Soldat told him. Yes, Soldat's a jerk, but Soldat told him something he sort of needed to hear. Something that produced doubt in him, but at the same time did sort of help him. I want to finish this. He wants a success, basically. In the end, he just wants a success. I did this. Also, technically right now, he believes that Edis abandoned him. And he doesn't want to abandon Sarah too. He knows how much that hurt him, and he wouldn't want to do the same to her. But yeah, most of this stuff is sort of different, but I did love the whole lancing of the buffaloes. That looked really, really cool. But yes, he discovers Mimur, he discovers Sarah, which is basically just an area where the buffaloes kind of gather the corpses in hopes that other monsters come there and they can eat them. He was saddened by Mimur's death. It was even at this point kind of recalls him how he's a quiet guy. Remembers that look on his face when they mentioned the fact that Mimur was like the first person that wanted to abandon Rudeus back at the ruins. Like, he was the one that was going, let's get out of here, the dude's gone. But again, he didn't blame Mimur for saying that. He knew that that was probably the right choice, to abandon him. The earrings that he does find here is interesting because they actually cause an illusion. He finds out later that she used it to pierce one of the buffaloes to create a sort of illusion so that it didn't attack her. But the Triant... The Triant. Yeah, this fight was really quick in the anime. It was like, done. I was like, wait, what? Wait, what? But yes, essentially, whenever a Triant kills something, it puts it inside of his roots so that when they decay, it absorbs the nutrients. So that's why Sarah is there. But he quickly realizes she's not dead. So he starts to fight the Triant. Now the whole thing about the Triant is that at some point, Rudeus discovers that it sort of has a rotation. It lashes with its branches, it creates these ice blocks that fall upon its enemies, and it goes back to lashing again. And Rudeus realizes that it's doing this over and over and over again. It has sort of a gamey rotation. So what Rudeus does is he ends up taking out the limbs that could reach him. And this sort of makes it stop using its spell, the blocks, because it's stuck in its rotation. And that's the moment that Rudeus has to rush in there, grab Sarah, and pull her out of it. Which is really interesting. And I'm curious if this will, even from my perspective, I'm curious if this will be something that they'll get into again later on. Why does this thing have almost a rotation? Is it that simple-minded, or is there something else about it? Again, I'm not spoiling anything, this is just a theory that I came up with at this time, and I still haven't had it answered. And it may never get answered. But the follow-up of this scene is where everything this is where it starts to frustrate me. Everything else that's been changed doesn't really bother me too much. This sort of frustrates me. Because in escaping, Rudeus jumps them into the water. Doesn't happen. Which ends up meaning they both have to take their clothes off in the cave, which, again, didn't happen. What happens in the novel here is that Rudeus takes her, rushes her off, and then realizes that her leg is jacked up bad. Now, something that's always been avoided in the anime adaptation is that healing requires direct contact, so he has to touch the wound. So, they have to pull down her shorts. And in the scene, he's touching her thigh, healing her, and yes, also taking in the snow-soaked clothing that pretty much reveals everything even down there, and that's what's kind of making him get all kind of pervy. But Sarah doesn't shield herself. That's the difference here. Rudeus assumes that at this point, Sarah is sort of giving him a prize. That's why he thanks her at the end. Oh, she's not covering up and being ashamed because she knows that I just saved her life and he's allowing her to see things. In his mind, again, it's just sort of her repaying him. She's embarrassed, but she's not covering herself up. She was pretty much silent the whole time. He does also kind of acknowledge that this is kind of normal for adventurers. Again, to heal, you have to touch. And he figures even if Mimir was here, he would probably do the same thing. But yeah, this is where he's starting to think, wait, something feels off. Maybe it was the buffaloes. Maybe it was this. Something feels off, which they haven't really explained too much yet. But everything else about that scene does technically come out. This idea that she's thanking him for saving his life. But at the same time, he's sort of thankful of her. Seeing her smile was a reward. More so in the idea that he feels like he accomplished something. This is a big thing for Rudeus right now because he's so broken. Every success is a massive thing for somebody that is so broken like Rudeus is right now. He wants success. He likes the idea of helping somebody. Seeing her smile like that pretty much made him think that everything that he had done up to that point was forgiven. Like, this meant a lot to him. He sort of sees Edis for a brief moment and then kind of just shakes his head like, no, don't think about Edis. Yes, if you're not getting it by this point, Sarah is basically a Edis replacement. But yes, they return back to the town, and one significant thing is sort of missing here in the idea that at some point, Sarah needed a rest. But Rudeus kept pressing. He wanted to get back to the town. He didn't want them to stay out in the middle of nowhere. So he pushed her, and she didn't complain. And when they got back to the town, what it kind of mentions later on is that yeah, Sarah needs to rest. He acknowledged that she needed to get back to the inn so that she can rest. Yeah, he didn't sleep that night, but he acknowledged the fact that not only did she not sleep that night, but she was in incredible pain for a long time being stuck in that Triant. Again, her leg was literally broken. So he does feel bad that he didn't allow Sarah to get some rest, but at the same time he acknowledges that if they did, Suzanne and their party would be out in the forest now. They would have missed them. So it was actually a good thing they made it there fast. And he does acknowledge the fact that they probably would have helped too. It's just that they didn't have the ability to clear all the weather. They were stuck by the blizzard. Rudeus didn't have that problem because he just blew it away. But yeah, the reuniting was cute though. I really did like that. I just seeing Timothy breaking down, it hurts because Timothy felt the most to blame. He was their leader. They kind of mentioned in the anime the idea that Suzanne's like, don't worry about it. We all made this decision. But Timothy felt it was on his hands. Her blood was on his hands. So this was huge for him. And also Suzanne, because Suzanne's like a big sister to Sarah. And this hurts everybody. Sarah was like a part of the group. It was a part of the family. But yes, they did cut it that Timothy right here, knowing that Mimir's dead, he was going to invite Rudeus to join Counter Arrow. He goes to say something, but then he stops himself. And Rudeus is like, I figure he probably wanted me to join the group, but I would probably tell him no because I can't stay here. I can't stay in this town. Eventually, I'm going to have to leave this town. And yes, that wraps up with Rudeus parting ways with everybody. Sarah saying her obvious I love you. And then him going back to his room and feeling just totally refreshed. Now, some side things here. One, let's acknowledge that this is technically the birth of the religion of Roxyism. Yes, as you might have known, he now has an altar where he's putting Roxy's Ponsu in. And I've stated several times before that I believe this is the point in which this religion has started. He is now praying to Roxy. Yes, before he had the Ponsu and he's always stretching it out and loving it and sniffing and all that kind of stuff. But now he's literally praying to it. You see this at the guild where he's actually praying in front of everybody and they're like, wait, what the hell is he doing? This is important to him. I like the fact that some of them, I don't even think it acknowledged it in the anime, but at some of them kind of note this and they go, shh, don't say anything. It's important to him. He's obviously praying. It's like they don't realize that he's praying to a pair of Ponsu. Well, he's praying to Roxy, but with a pair of Ponsu in his hand. Additionally, and I assume this was going to happen, they have skipped a lot of perspective of Sarah during this entire time. Now, I won't get into later stuff because I think they could still technically cover it in the next chapter, but Sarah, this entire time, is obviously conflicted by Rudy. She doesn't like him. First impressions, we all know that. Didn't seem to like him. But then he keeps doing things to help them. He always ends up saving them. Save them from the Luster Grizzlies. And then later on in these ruins, save them from all these drakes. He stood the line and allowed them to escape. And that's why she turned back. He's trying to save us. We have to go back for him. So far, up to this point, what's revealed in the novel is that Sarah doesn't like Rudy because he's a noble. He has a last name, Rudeus Greyrat. Thus, he is a noble. And she hates nobles. I don't think it's covered it in the anime at this point, but yes, it typically, you don't have a last name unless you're a noble or from a noble family. That's why Sarah is Sarah. That's why Suzanne's Suzanne. But Rudeus is Rudeus Greyrat. So she knows he's a noble. The problem is that up to this point, they keep partying up with nobles. And every time she's ever partied with a noble, she just sees them as bratty kids that just want to get away from their home because they're rebelling or something like that. They join the adventure guild, they end up joining a party, and then the first time something bad happens, they're the first one to flee. They're cowards. They don't see this as their life. Sarah and the rest of them, this is their life. They can't flee. If they don't finish a job, they don't eat. Additionally, they'll have to pay a fee for failing the job. But these noble kids, no, they run. They don't need to worry about failing the job. They just go back crying to mama. And that's why Sarah immediately hates Rudeus, because he's a noble. But he's not acting like nobles. He didn't flee. He saved them from the Luster Grizzlies. He held the line when they were fleeing from the Drakes. Rudy's different, and she's starting to see that, and it frustrates her. It frustrates her because this is what she's always seen these nobles as. He's different. Why? It doesn't make sense to her. She wants to hate him. And like I said, there's more to this story as it goes along, but unfortunately, I don't think they're going to cover really any of it. They might show a brief scene and sort of give a little context to it, but I don't think they are. I think, like I've said before, most of this adaptation has been mostly focused on Rudeus' perspective, so I doubt they'll even do that. But most of this volume is back and forth between Rudeus and Sarah, because it's kind of important to know how things unfold later on, but I will cover that as it goes to it. So again, if you want to get context from the novel, this is where it's at. There was, again, like I said, a lot here that was skipped, so hopefully I covered most all the important stuff. I think most of the cool stuff is around the ruins themselves and how it was created and how that kind of ties in with the war. Technically, the kid that hurt herself, which again, like I said, how that ties into later, I don't think they're even going to cover it, but we'll see. If they don't, again, I'll explain it. But yeah, technically Timothy, his previous party, how the fact that he went to the University of Magic and all this other stuff is just shrug, I guess. They don't want to cover any of that, which again, it makes sense because it's not Rudeus. It's not directly involving Rudeus. The Kishirika statue was pretty cool, but again, I didn't really envision it that way. I thought it was like a standalone statue, not carved in the wall. But it was massive, and that's technically what it should have been. They didn't really get into it, but yes, the scales from the frost drakes are very strong. That's why they were afraid of actually fighting them, because it's hard to penetrate their scales. And there are some guards and stuff in certain areas that will actually wear full armor of this stuff. And you just know these people are fitted out. But yeah, that's my thoughts on episode 2 of Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation. I hope you guys enjoy this video as always, and hopefully give you some insight and some stuff that's sort of skipped. Again, rip Mimir. Rip Mimir. But hope you guys enjoyed as always. If you did, hit that like button down below, comment, let me know what's thought of the episode. Additionally, if you're new to the channel, make sure that subscribe button to get all my content. I do news reviews, first impressions, top list. If it's anime, it's pretty much here. I also do coverage of this show every single Sunday, as well as Mushoku Mondays every Monday, where I do premiere, where I'm reading through the novels series. I'm currently on volume 12, which is currently speculated to be at the end of the second season, so it is past the anime. But we'll see at this point if we're burning through 80 pages, almost a half of an entire volume in one episode. We might get further than that, but we'll see. But additionally, if you like this content, you want to support the channel more, I have a Patreon link, tips link, super thanks, and membership button down below. I greatly appreciate everybody that does, and y'all take care.